This is Martha Bolton, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I love this. Martha and I have been talking off mic, but this is going to be a great story. And I think it's super timely, even though Bob Hope has passed 20 years almost now. But the story remains fresh, and the anniversaries of things like World War II and these events that he went out to as he establishes the USO. It's important to remember these things. We oftentimes kind of minimize the roles of people who have gone before us and have passed, and we sort of dismiss them, forget about them, whatever it is, Martha. But you and Bob's daughter, you've gotten together and you've got this project together, and it's incredible. And then I also want to set the conversation to go like this too. I was at the World War I museum, and I was asking them like how many stories are in the building, and they're like, you have no idea. This is a worldwide conflict, and we've got thousands, tens of thousands of letters of love stories and impossible things, all these things that have happened. And Bob is such an integral part of that from his era, from what World War II on until
Right.
2003, for crying out loud. So let's talk a little bit about the genesis of the project, and then just slide into any of these other parts of the conversation.
Okay. The project started when Bob was alive, back 20 years ago, and I had come upon the letters. We're working on some project, and so the letters came to my attention, and I was just overwhelmed by what was in those letters. Not only the historical significance, but it shows the relationship of Bob with the GIs. That I always knew that he was close to the GIs and that they loved him. They'd come down to the show tapings, and you could just see him interact with a veteran. And so you knew that there was this strong bond there. But until I read these letters, I had no idea as to the depth that relationship goes. And it goes all the way back to World War II. And it's just it was an incredible eye-opening experience for me as far as how far they would go for Bob and how far he would go for them. And Linda grew up with the letters, always being in the house and the office. And so she had a warm bond with the letters as well. So I just felt that they would make a great book. So I talked with Bob about it and asked him if he had ever thought about making the letters into a book. And he agreed that it was a great idea, but for himself, they were so close that it was an emotional. It would have been hard for him to go through the letters. But he suggested that I talk with Linda and see. And so Linda and I started having meetings about the letters and started working on it. Started going through the boxes and making selections. And as what happens in Hollywood, sometimes, another project comes up and then you have to move over to that. And so that kept happening. And unfortunately, Bob then passed away. But neither one of us ever forgot about this project. And a few years ago, Linda contacted me and asked if I wanted to get back onto the book. And I was so excited, I couldn't believe it. And it just seemed like the right time. And by this time, the letters were now up at the Library of Congress. They were at his house, but now they were at the Library of Congress. So I started going up there and finishing my research and then writing the book and finishing it up. And I would send it to Linda, the manuscript, and then she'd make great contributions and suggestions. And we'd go back and forth. And then the University Press of Mississippi got on board, and it was just a wonderful project to work on. And we just poured ourselves into it. And it was supposed to come out last year. But I think in Bob Hope style, because he's known for his timing, I think it is even better that it came out now, because we're so looking for hope. And after going through 2020, that year that we all had to survive, we want hope, and we want to be reminded how much we need each other. And there's so much in these letters that comes through, the encouragement and the hang on spirit, and just all of it is so timely for right now.
I've spent a lot of time this year, especially during the pandemic, reading Laura Ingalls Wilder's work and
Mm.
just getting into, I mean, I knew the show and I probably read a book or two when I was a kid, but I wanted to just get into something, I wanted authors from their time in their voice and to
Yeah.
write. And letter writing is a craft that is, for the most part, it's dead. I mean, we write very short things. We assume a lot of
Mhm.
context, that kind of thing. But in a letter, especially when the letters pass each other, going by 2 weeks at a time, you write a letter into the future, kind of thing.
Right.
Letter writing is such a different way to communicate. I want to ask you two questions. That way you can talk for a little bit and I can shut up. But one is you've known Bob for a long time. How much better did you get to know him through the book, through the process of writing the book and reading the letters? And two, what are your thoughts on letter writing?
Well, I agree. I think you pour your heart out more in a letter, because you could use as many pieces of paper as you want, make it as long as you want. It's not these short little snippets. And I think just they were at such a vulnerable place. They could have died at any moment. So it's like if you're in an airplane and the pilot just said we're having trouble, and one of the engines just went out, and what do you say to your loved ones? It's those kind of moments that all the pretense is gone and you just are pouring your heart out. And that's what these letters are, is these soldiers who could die at any minute. They're talking to their, not a celebrity, they're talking to their best friend, they're talking to a buddy. That was the difference on these letters. That I don't know of fan letters other than these that come across like that they were so close, they could tell him anything. They would tell him things that they didn't even tell their family, because they didn't want their family to worry. And they wrote from foxholes, they wrote from their camp, they wrote from the hospital beds. He was the one they wanted to share their heart with. And Bob Hope, who was at the height of his career, major celebrity, major star, he made time to make sure that he answered as many of these letters as he could. He didn't brush them off. It wasn't something that was just handed off to the secretary, although she did an amazing job of saving all of these letters. At the height of the war, he was receiving 38,000 fan letters a week. Can you imagine her secretarial skills that had to come into play? And not only did she keep the letters, she kept Bob's responses. So in the time of carbon paper and onion skin paper, she was keeping all those responses. So in those banker boxes, pretty much, that had thousands and thousands and thousands of letters, that was stayed at his house, and then is up at the Library of Congress now. We owe a great debt of gratitude to her for having the foresight of the historical significance of that collection.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I was going to ask how you got the received correspondence that went out, and their, just the exchange. So that's great to know that the secretary had the foresight to do that. That's brilliant. And then what did you pick up from Bob as you read these letters? I mean, you knew the man. I mean, he employed you. You were a joke writer for him. I mean,
Yeah.
for a long time. So what did you pick up, or how did your knowledge and love for Bob grow through the process?
Well, I think I got an inside look to his heart, and it was bigger than I even knew it to be, because I would watch him on the shows, and we would record there at NBC, or if we were at a location. But if we were at NBC, most of the time he would, after he had been there all day recording, and late, we were into the evening now, pretty late, and the show was done, and he would invite the audience to stay if they wanted to. Otherwise, they could leave. And he would then do all of these appeals for fundraisers for different, organizations, for all these benefits. And he was in no hurry to go home. He would stay until they were all done, and until they were done right, and just one after another after another. So you knew his heart. But in reading the letters and the things that people didn't know unless you read the letters, he didn't brag about the things he did. He just did them. And then you'd have these letters from a soldier thanking him for this. Like this one soldier wrote, and he and his company had walked 10 miles to go see the show. And by the time they got there were so many thousands of other GIs there that they could barely, see him or hear him. And so they turned around and started walking back. Well, news of that got to Bob. And after the show, he got in a Jeep, a couple of stars with him, and went out and found them on the road, parked, and put on a private show just for those guys in the rain for 40 minutes. You never heard about that in the news. That was just this soldier thanking him for that. But that happened time and time again. If he was on one island and soldiers were on another and wanted him to come over, and it's just a handful of them, he would do everything he could to make sure he got over there. Even if it was bad weather, he would go over there. The pilot may be saying, well, we really shouldn't go. And he'd go, we could do it. And sure enough, he'd get there.
This is a remarkable thing. I mean, obviously it's part of Bob's passion and his drive to do that. I've been to USO shows. I've been at camps where there are no USO shows because it is too remote. And I've seen the people that do it, and they're all wonderful. But it appears that Bob is the greatest USO champion of all time. I mean, I've not seen that level of compassion. I mean, he built this thing. He, compelled, the arm twisted, he did whatever he could to bring, his peers out on the road. But then to go to that next thing, like to say, send me further out, let me drive in the rain. By the way, there's a war going on. This is dangerous. You don't have to.
He had some close calls. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. And I want to get into that too. But before we get too far past the letter writing thing, I want to echo that, because when you sit there and you're on a patrol and you're going to write a letter, because I kind of my career kind of closes out the letter writing era and goes into email, right? So we were still writing letters, but you would think about a letter you were going to write all day and reread the letter that you got all day. And so you would really have this long conversation, and you're in these stressful moments and you're like, oh, I've got a few minutes, let me jot some of these notes down. I mean, this is how you do this. And so when you say foxholes, yeah, no fooling, what else are you going to do in a foxhole? Like, okay, we're in this fox, we're going to be here for who knows, 2 days, 18 hours, 10 minutes, you don't know. And so, and you also don't know what's going to happen next, if you're going to die or whatever. And those thoughts are so precious. You've really curated something, and those letters that we got they were remarkable. It was like medicine from home. And to know that Bob was out there doing, was Bob one of those people that every letter got a response? Or, I mean, can you even keep up with the pace of letters that he?
As much as he could. And I'm sure that he wished he could do them all. And maybe he did, but it just seems like an overwhelming amount of letters that I don't know if you could humanly do it, but if he could have, he certainly would have, and perhaps, did. He went a lot farther than others would have probably gone in the answering of it. It was overwhelming, but he had the attitude that if they took the time to write to him, he wanted to write back. And he would even put them on his Christmas list. And there would be GIs that would write him and say, thank you for the Christmas card you sent. The first year you were here, I had met you. So I was not surprised, but the second year and the third year, and you're still sending Christmas cards is pretty remarkable. And another thing that he would do was the moms, he would, if a soldier got close enough to Bob at a show and they handed him their mother's phone number, or it could be their wife's or, whoever, and they would ask Bob to call them when he got home and let them know that he had seen them and that they were doing fine. Sometimes even if they weren't, if they were in a hospital, they didn't want them to know it. But Bob would come home from all the traveling, and you knew he had to be exhausted, and would sit on the phone and call number after number to these mothers and wives and whoever else, dads, and just fulfill that promise. He was a promise fulfiller. He made a promise to the GIs way back when he first started, and he kept it all the way to the end. 50 years.
It's still, and again, it's so remarkable. I mean, you think about it's one thing to go on and again, everybody who goes on a USO tour, thank you so much. I mean, we had Billy Blanks came to our camp one day, it was great. I've seen John Elway and Robin Williams,
Yeah.
tons of people. It's all fantastic, but it's different for Bob. I mean, to take on the responsibility of touring and then the cost and because look, even if it doesn't cost him money to fly there, he's not making a movie. He's not getting paid
Right.
something. I mean, this is his time, and his time is the most expensive thing he has. And he's writing letters and he's calling people on the phone and on and on and on. And then for 50 years to continue to do this, to continue to champion
Right.
to his peers, again, you have to go do this. What on earth drove him so? It seems like the thing that he did the hardest his whole life.
Yes. I think what drove him, he talks about thanks for the memories, and he has great memories throughout his whole career. But he also has these memories that are in his heart of scenes that he saw of GIs in those hospitals. And that gets in your heart. You can't put that away. And I think that's what drove him, is knowing the sacrifice that all of these, and a lot of them were kids that had never been away from home, and they're 18, 19 years old. Shows that he had done. There was one show that he did that approximately 60% of the kids in the audience, of the people in that audience, were killed in the next battle. So that just, you can't unhear that. It just stays with you, and I think that drove him. He was a real believer. If they were sacrificing that much, then he could do the least that he could do. And although it was great by anybody's standards, but compared to what the GIs were giving up, he knew that's what he wanted to do, and his being able to pay back and show appreciation for everything that they had done to protect him.
What were his thoughts on his legacy? So that Joe Montana, for example, Priscilla Presley, they're both into veteran charities, and they'd make a lot of appearances based on that. And I have to think that they're in some way the progeny of his charitable work. I mean, he created this thing where people go to hospitals. I mean, I know Babe Ruth went to hospitals and that kind of thing too, but in terms of soldiers, you have presidents and stars saying, "Get me to a veteran in the hospital." I think he owns part of that reality.
Right.
People don't even think to do that.
Right, and he knew that one of these days he wasn't going to be here, and who was going to take that mission over. And it is interesting that there's so many that have taken it over, and it takes that many to fulfill what this one man was doing all by himself. Well, not totally by himself, because he had his troupe, he had other entertainers that were certainly doing it, but it's so obvious and so clear of the accomplishments that this one man made and the difference he made in the world for one man.
And you say one man, again, it's just remarkable to me. I mean, the body of work, it doesn't seem possible. I mean, just flying somewhere back in those days, in World War II specifically, you were on a prop plane. You weren't going 600
Yeah,
hour, like you were going slow. And I know, like, I've been on a lot of military planes. It's not terribly comfortable. You know, it's not built for
yeah.
comfort. So if you get moved on that kind of, I mean, it's just how does how did he get anything else done? I mean, with all of the work he did here, granted it's a lifetime of work, but it's just remarkable. Well, I mean, the letter writing, just because there are people, it's not a computer doing this. This is a person typing this for you,
Right.
having to give them the notes, they take them down, then they type it, then they type a letter. I mean, an envelope, like it's bananas. The
I
amount of
know.
did he have a staff of secretaries just constantly cranking out
I
letters?
usually just one. He just had the one, and but he was driven. He his whole career. He uh, with each stage of it, Broadway, film, radio, television, he he would set his mind on it, and just he, he didn't take no for an answer, but he also didn't take no from himself for an answer. He would do whatever he could for whoever he could, and he would keep pushing with his career into whatever new medium came along. And then he was, I'll do that. And there was no arrogance about him, but he had a confidence that I'll try that. I'll give that a try, and I'll give that a try. And he was fearless, both in his career, but also on these military jaunts. For someone who played characters that were so cowardly so many times in the comedy of it, he was one of the bravest people that you'd ever meet. He didn't even hesitate to go into dangerous situations.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, his fearlessness of danger, and like you said, he's had close calls. Let's talk about those after that. But where did he get? I get the self-deprecating thing. That was part of what he did, and he also probably didn't want to show up the soldiers, at all. So, but what do you attribute that courage to?
I think all the well, there was a point in his life where he wasn't in the early days, and he wasn't making it, and was flat broke in Chicago. And I think he had that low point, and then someone he ran into somebody that he knew, and they gave him a job, and it really turned his life back. He was ready to quit, and it turned his life back into thinking that he could do it. And I think situations like that came along. I think the realization that you are doing these shows, and at any moment you could die as well, and then seeing the soldiers that were sacrificing, and I think there's more things more valuable than your fears, and he just would work through it for the guys. It was the mission was more important, and he wanted them not only in wartime to know he had their backs, but he wanted them to know in peace he had their backs, and whatever they wanted, he saw to it that they got it, or he would bring it up as high up the chain as he could. He'd go to Congress, he'd go to the president. He had no qualms about being there for the guys, and the guys knew that. In letter after letter, they knew of everybody. Bob Hope had their backs.
What about close calls?
There's letters where the soldiers would write and talk about a show that he had done, and they'd say, remember how close the bombs go, and when to you on stage, and there's a lot of references to that, and different nights that they had to spend together with Bob, hiding in protection, and but he was right there with the GIs. He wasn't off in a hotel all by himself. He was right there with the GIs, ducking the same incoming as they were ducking. And he even had a plane crash, him and the entire troop in Australia. And he was at the controls, trying his hand at flying the plane, and one of the engines went out, and the pilot, immediately took over the controls. It wasn't Bob's fault; it just happened, and so he had to do like Captain, Sully, that had to land in the river. Wow. And yeah, and you can imagine the scare, how that felt to all the passengers. But they came down, and a boat rescued them. But he found out later that had the plane hit a sandbar, which is where they ended up, had it hit the sandbar first before it hit the water, the plane would have most likely exploded. So that was another close call. And the fun thing of that is after they got rescued, and even he went to the postmaster to send a telegram to let people know that he was okay. And the postmaster didn't believe it was Bob Hope when he said who he was. So he finally did convince him, and Bob had to borrow 11 pounds from the postmaster to get a hotel and some food. And then later that evening, the whole troop put on a show for just the members of the community. It's about 600 and something members of the community, just about the whole area, came out to this show that they put on just for them. And then after the show, they all played hokey pokey all night till 4:00 in the morning. And to this day, they celebrate in that town the day Hollywood fell out of the sky, and they have this big carnival, and they all play hokey pokey there, and they serve his favorite pie, lemon meringue, and it's a big celebration. So it's pretty interesting. But yeah, they could have died. It would have been everybody.
I mean, it's a plane crash.
Yeah.
Wow. When Bob looked at the book and he wanted you guys to work on it, I mean, is this something that he realized that wasn't for him anymore? I mean, the desire and the capacity to do it. Do you think that he knew that this book would speak for him later in life?
I think so. He trusted us with it, which was quite an honor, and he knew what was in the letters. He, of all people, knew what was in the letters, and I think he wanted to pay tribute to those guys and girls that had given so much, and their hearts are in the letters, and it's so full of, the whole book is full of gratitude. It's his gratitude to them and their gratitude to him.
What didn't make it in? I mean, there's 38,000 letters in a short amount of time, then another 38,000 letters, and then another 30. I mean, it never stops, right? So a lot of things get into the book. Is there a second book, I mean, that you guys could do?
Yes, I would really like to do make it a trilogy if we can, and the second one being the Korean War and conflict, and the Cold War, and then the third one being Vietnam and Desert Storm. So that would be a nice trilogy.
Some of Bob's brothers served in the military. John Ford, Jimmy Stewart, these guys. Why didn't Bob just sign up? I mean, he obviously has a passion for this work. What kept him from just becoming a colonel in the reserves and working in some capacity on the inside?
Well, him and Bing both were offered to be a lieutenant colonel in the Navy, and he wanted to enlist, but Roosevelt felt at the time that his services would be best utilized entertaining the troops, and so Bob agreed to that, and certainly took it way beyond what he was signing up for. I mean, he just didn't stop. So Roosevelt was right as far as making that decision put him where he was best utilized and the nation best served. And for goodness sakes, he certainly went above and beyond. He takes commitment to a whole new level.
Yeah, again, I'll say, yeah, he really does that. But do you think I know a lot of people who are extremely successful, they have this sort of hole. I wouldn't call it a regret, but this wonder, like, could I have measured up? As a UFC fighter, Hall of Fame fighter, right? UFC, and his name's T Ortiz, and he's like, I just don't know. I never got to hold it up. I never got to challenge myself and really be one of you guys. And we're like, hey, you did it. I mean, you are as tough and as courageous as anybody.
Yeah.
We love you. You don't have to prove anything, but you don't get to absolve that person of that hole. You don't get to fill it for him. We can tell him, hey, no problem. You did. I mean, look, Pope doesn't owe anybody anything. Matter of fact, we all owe him. If we're going to balance the ledger out. But did he still have that hole where he's like, I wish I could have served, just didn't work out for him?
He got so many letters from soldiers who would say that, what he had done, he had gone above and beyond what so many of them had done themselves, or they just held him at such a high bar. And then in his response back to this one particular letter, he says, sometimes you wonder if you've done enough. And but when you receive letters like yours telling me that I had, then I guess there's no more questions to be answered. So he did get that feedback from the soldiers themselves. And of course, he got it from presidents and everybody else that he had interacted with. He got a lot of that, but he never took his. He was in awe of his own career. When Dolores had remodeled Bob's office at their house, I had went up to deliver some material, and then he was also showing me the remodel. And there's this hallway outside of his office, and it was lined with photograph after photograph of him with this president and that president and this general and that general and this king and this queen. And he was pointing them all out and telling me where it happened. And then we get to the end of the hallway, and he looks at me and he goes, "It's something, isn't it, Martha? It really is something." And he couldn't believe it himself, and was not arrogant about it. He was in awe of it. And so he knew that he lived a blessed life, that all of this had happened to him. And then he tried to give back as much of it as he could. He used every bit of talent he had, and maybe he had more. Maybe he could have gone on another 100 years showing us what else he could do. But he used his talent. He used his resources to help others, and just could not give back enough. And I think the world needs to know that.
Yeah, the world does need to know that. I mean, because what a remarkable life, and that time too, to come up when he did. For those that don't know, Bob was basically born in the earliest part of the 1900s. When Jesse Owens got back from the Olympics, he pumped gas for a job. Like, wealth was a different thing back then. You sewed your own suits, you put buttons on your own things, because you didn't have money to just order it from Amazon. And there's something that comes with a person who perseveres through, an impossible path to get somewhere. Like right now, if you can figure out the algorithm, you can go out and build yourself into some level of a celebrity without having really had that kind of poverty, that doubt. Yeah, this isn't working. Those moments are different, and there's something that I think we lose with that when you don't have to. When everybody has the ability to go and become famous, you lose that ability and that responsibility. That once you get there, you're like, man, I know where I came from. I know what it's like to be a kid from Iowa who's now, an artillery officer.
He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot those times when, like in Chicago, when he was hungry and he's walking by the windows and the people are inside at this nice restaurant, and having a wonderful dinner, and he's really hungry. He never forgot that. And he was a very loyal person too. He would, when we would do the shows, he'd have all his friends from vaudeville come on the show, and even if they weren't in the cast, they'd stop by the studio just to watch him, just to say hello. And it was very often that we'd have George Burns, Milton Berle, Lucy, just so many of the great legends, and you'd see them play back and forth. They had so many memories, and they all had amazing amount of respect for Bob Hope. In fact, George Burns, on one of the shows that we did, the writers, we went into his dressing room and wanted to get our picture taken with him, and he was so gracious and let us do that. But then when we were done, he just looked at us and said, "You work for the nicest man in show business." And this was a man that knew him all his life. So it's amazing. And that was everybody's opinion of him. He was one of the most generous people in Hollywood, the nicest, just would help anybody out. And that just followed him. He built a great reputation that way. And it was sincere. It wasn't to get more press. He didn't need that. He didn't need it. He just had a heart for others.
When Bob hired you as a female writing jokes and stuff, how groundbreaking was that in your guys' day when he brought you on board?
I think it was pretty groundbreaking, but I wasn't aware of it. I was treated so wonderfully by the others on the staff. They were just so helpful, and I tended to be shy. I would hold myself back, and they kept growing me into the position, and would if we had some lines we had to rewrite, they'd take me with them into the dressing room and to sell the line to Bob, and then it would be sometimes they'd send me in by myself and grow me that way, or to go for a line change to one of the stars. They'd have me go up and do it, and I'm sitting there shaking, especially when we were in his dressing room. He'd be in the makeup chair, and there on the sofa sometimes you'd have like George Burns and Milton Berle and Danny Todd all waiting for the line. And talk about pressure. That was these incredible giants of comedy, and you're there. But I mean, there was this one time I remember that I had to take a line to one of the actresses, and knocked on her door, and she thought I was the costume designer, and so she was showing me where to put the buttons on her on her clothes, and she didn't want me doing her clothes, because I would have added a third sleeve or something. That's not my gift. So
I have a helicopter going overhead outside of my studio. I'm just trying to be quiet. Yeah, that's funny. It's good to hear that. I mean, the camaraderie between Danny and George. I mean, you think about the names that you're saying. These are icons in Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra. These guys. This is when they were in their prime, like during this World War II, just before, all the way after until they stopped. I mean, these are some of the biggest names in show business, and these guys were his buddies palling around.
I know. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense these days. That you would be so well liked that your friends would hang out with you at your work. I mean, that's
right. Yeah, yeah. And they at a phone call, if you needed them for whatever, they were there. The biggest names in show business. They just couldn't do enough for Bob Hope. I think so many of them, especially in World War II, and then throughout the other wars as well, and in peacetime, they saw the man. They saw his how he would give back, and they just knew his mission and wanted to be a part of it.
How do you characterize? You knew the man, he put you to work. He's an icon, but he's also your boss, and he's also this enjoyable person. How do you sort all that out? Who was the Bob Hope that you knew?
Well, you know, working with him, he was so nice. In 15 years, he never said one unkind word to me, which is remarkable for a boss, especially one that's in a high pressure job. But never said an unkind word to me. And he was so easy to talk to and so kind. I remember when my mother died, he called me up and we talked about moms and his mother and my mother, and just had a heart for people and his staff. And we at parties that he would have, he'd have everybody there. He'd have presidents, and he'd have his gardener and their families, and just he was so welcoming to people, and just inclusive, just wonderful that way. And so you got to where he was so nice as far as it was so easy to talk to him. It was like talking to your uncle. It was just this nice, down to earth, not pretentious in any way, and just you joke. He loved to talk about jokes. He loved that. He loved to call you up and tell you which jokes were played well, and he loved, as soon as one show finished, he'd be on the phones calling. I mean, as soon as it finished, he would be on the phone. Well, what are we going to do next? He just loved what he did, and so it was easy to forget because he was so friendly. It was easy to forget who he was. And then you'd go to some event at this big football stadium, and there's a flyover and a marching band all in his honor. And then you'd realize and be quickly reminded of who he was, or you'd go to a party and the presidents that would be there. So how he balanced the two to have the opportunities and the awards and the honors, which he holds the record for being the most honored person ever, and to have that side of him, and then to keep it in balance and be not arrogant but confident. Uh, not not many people can do that, and he did it so well and so admirably that you, you just get to the end of when I got to the end of this project, and you saw everything, especially the wrap up chapter of who he was, and so many things that he had done. He was a high school dropout and got 57 honorary doctorates as a high school dropout. Did that, talk about inspirational, just amazing. So the difference that one man can make, and not a, like I said, he was a dropout. He had done, he just, he had singleness of purpose, and definitely ended his life well, as good as anybody could.
I want to talk about his daughter Linda in a second here, but first let me say this. You guys got to get Dear Bob. There's an ellipse at the end of it. So Dear Bob, and then you go on to Amazon, and then it'll come up, and it's just this book, and it's got this treasure trove of letters, and Martha and Linda have kind of curated this list, this incredible history. I mean, spending time with talking about Bob, so I want people not to forget like how incredible this person. I didn't know he was the most recognized dude ever, or that he had a bazillion PhDs, honorary, whatever. Who cares? He's made such a difference in people's lives, and to read about the personal stories, the day to day things. I mean, there's. I was listening to you on another podcast. I think it was Lights Action Author. I think it was called, and you talked about the letter that he got from a mom or a wife, or whatever. It's like, you saw my loved one, my husband, whatever it was, after I did, and so I feel like you should know that he passed on during the war. It's all these incredible stories. You guys definitely get Dear Bob. Get Dear Bob on Amazon. By the way, if you're supporting the show, here's how you can help me. There's a PayPal link going across on the bottom of the page right now. You can click on that and just do a monthly subscription. Do whatever you want, $5, $20, whatever it is, $100, whatever it is that goes into helping me keep the show going. All the money goes right back into the show. And subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe. Can't tell you how important that is. I want to talk about Linda because she's a big part of this story. And it's one thing to have Bob's life, but you knew him for 15 years before he passes. She's obviously known him her whole life. This is inside stuff. Talk about your guys' relationship and what it was like to create with her.
It was we started when he was alive, and so she had grown up with the letters, obviously being his daughter. And she even did a report, a high school report about these letters that she had grown up with, and how she had approached the secretary and asked what they were. And the secretary said, it's history. That's in those boxes. That's history. And so they always meant a lot to her. And so when we started meeting about doing the book, she was very hands-on as far as deciding some of the letters that needed to be in there for sure. And making the decisions was so hard because you did have so many letters to pick from. And you'd think you were done. We kept thinking we were done, and then we'd try and edit down and make the book a little bit smaller, and then we'd keep adding letters, and then it got a little too big, and then we just kept going through this process, and it was so hard to lose some letters that you needed to, but we had to keep being selective, and she was really good about that, and I would go up to the Library of Congress. We had gotten pretty far in the book when Bob was still alive and working at his house as far as the letters being there. And then after he passed away, then the letters were up in the Library of Congress. And then I would go up there and finish the research and then work on the book and then send it to her. And then she'd send it back with some suggestions and whatnot, and very valuable suggestions. And we both wanted to really take the reader into those times and make them feel like they were there. And I like to think that it worked that way and really gives them a feeling of being there. And they're getting the stories, from Bob's words and the GI's words, and it really it's pretty remarkable to have that gift left to the world.
And then I love to ask the question about the editing process, because there are letters that are just so wonderful, but they simply will not drive the story forward enough, or you just can't justify it, but they are so precious. So give us an example or two of some of those letters that you're just like, it breaks your heart to take them, because these stories must be, I can't wait to read the book,
Well, there was so much, some stories probably, I love the funny ones, obviously. And so I looked for a lot that had the funny, because it showed the give and take between Bob and the soldiers, and the goofing off that they would do together and challenging each other. So those are all fun. You had to make sure that the story was understandable and not from like a previous 2 or 3 letters and then building up. So it had to stand alone. And I wanted it to be separated, not so much in chronological, although it does take you through the war, but more in letters about their mom, or I won't be home for Christmas. So those letters are all together. They're complained about, whatever their situation was, and usually food or those kinds of things. And so those are all together. Gifts that they sent Bob, those are all together. So it's nice to read through it that way, to where all those all those are there. I'm missing my sweetheart. So it's all the ones where they would write and lament their loneliness and share it with Bob, you know.
How much a part of the big mission? I mean, ultimately, World War II, we're fighting fascism, we're fighting Nazis, we're fighting totalitarian, murderous Japanese, who went to other people's countries and started slaying people and torturing them. It's a horrible, horrible. And America has its own role in this, of course, but how much a part of that is? It's one thing to feel bad for that kid from Panhandle, Florida, who's now all of a sudden an infantry kid, but there's something bigger there that they're fighting, and you know the memories of World War I were fresh, 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how Bob saw that, like the bigger thing, or was it really more for him just about the troops and supporting them because what they were doing was impossible?
Well, I think the longer he was involved, and as the years went on, we through the letters and through just the news media and whatnot, you started finding out how bad it was and how much they were going through, and it got I'm sure there were times when they didn't know if they were going to make it. There's letters from soldiers that this one soldier was writing about this kid that was needed. They were going on to a mission, and he was that just before they were listening to the show, and just before they were listening to the show, this kid had remarked that he wasn't he was thinking about not showing up, and the courage that they got from listening to Bob Hope to fulfill their mission. And in many cases, they ended up losing their life. There's this one kid where he went over to fulfill his mission, and with a rifle, he was scared to death. And it says that he was scared like he had never been scared before. And he had a rifle in one hand and a rosary in the other, and went over and ended up, doing a remarkable job on what he accomplished. But Bob was their not only their encourager, but the one that gave them hope, the one that gave them courage. So much through there, and I think it must have overwhelmed him when he would read these letters, to think that he had played a part in that. It had to have uh, been very humbling and very
Yeah, yeah.
just you do a lot of soul searching and everything, but he was faithful to them, and was going to do whatever he could to make their lives better.
You've been through all of it, the man, you've read the things, but no matter what, at some point when you pass on, your life is summarized in 100 words, 1,000 words, 100,000 words. But I mean, that's really about it. But what's Bob at his best? Like, what did you read and go, that's the guy I'm trying to capture right there?
I think that he was. It's hard to do it in one, just one term. Well, there's one GI that wrote and said that he was a faith giver, which was a pretty good term to use for him. He just helped you believe in hope, and at your lowest point, he would bring the laughter, he would bring hope, he would bring courage, and all of that, can go under faith giver. And he he was so admired and respected by people that they just saw him, and he laid it on he gave everything. I think he gave everything he had and didn't hold anything back. In both his talent and his heart, he laid it all out there, and um, there was nothing left. I think when he left us. It's like Irma Bombeck had a great quote where she said that when she gets to heaven, that she hopes God says that you used everything I gave you, and I think that's true of Bob, and then some.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
he
yeah.
definitely got a lot out of life. Well, listen, everybody should buy Dear Bob. I mean, come on, how can you not hear that uh, and think anything other than I got to get this book right away? Get the link right there. It'll be in the show notes if you're on the podcast side listening. Thank you all so much for that. Stand by 1 second, Martha. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.